In the quiet hills of Bethlehem, a young shepherd named David tended his father's sheep. He was the youngest of 8 sons, unnoticed by men but watched by God. While his brothers trained for battle, David spent his days in the fields, guiding the sheep, fighting off predators, and composing songs of worship to the Lord. One day, as David sat on a rock, plucking the strings of his harp, a messenger arrived at his home. The prophet Samuel had come, sent by God to anoint the next king of Israel. Jesse, David's father, presented his older sons before the prophet, but one by one, they were rejected. "The Lord does not look at the things man looks at," Samuel declared. "Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." When no more sons remained, Samuel turned to Jesse. "Are these all of your sons?" Jesse hesitated before answering. "There is still the youngest, but he is tending the sheep." Samuel insisted that the boy be brought. And when David entered, sun-kissed and bright-eyed, the Lord spoke to Samuel. "This is the one." Samuel took his horn of oil and anointed David in the presence of his brothers. From that moment on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. But for now, the boy returned to his flock, unaware of the great trials and victories that lay ahead. Meanwhile, King Saul, the ruler of Israel, was tormented by an evil spirit. His once mighty heart was now restless, and his mind clouded with darkness. His servants, desperate to soothe him, sought out a musician. "There is a young shepherd in Bethlehem," one of them said. "He plays the harp beautifully, and the Spirit of God is with him." David was summoned to the palace. When he played, his music filled the halls with peace. The heavy spirit lifted from Saul, and for a time, he found relief. David, still a mere boy, became the king's musician and armor-bearer. But though he played for the king, his destiny was far greater than he could yet see. Not long after, Israel went to war against the Philistines. Among the enemy stood a giant, Goliath of Gath. Over 9 feet tall, clad in bronze armor, he struck fear into the hearts of Israel's soldiers. "Send me a man to fight," the giant roared each day. "If he defeats me, we will be your servants. But if I win, you will serve us." For 40 days, Goliath taunted Israel, and not a single warrior dared to face him. Then, one day, David arrived at the battlefield, sent by his father to deliver food to his brothers. When he heard the Philistines' challenge, his heart burned with righteous anger. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? His brothers mocked him, but David was undeterred. Brought before King Saul, he declared, "Let no one lose heart. I will fight him." Saul hesitated. "You are only a boy." "The Lord rescued me from the lion and the bear," David replied. "He will deliver me from this Philistine." Saul relented and offered David his armor, but it was too heavy. Instead, David took only his sling and 5 smooth stones from the stream. As he stepped onto the battlefield, Goliath laughed. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" David stood firm. "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." With a single movement, David slung a stone. It struck the giant in the forehead, sinking deep. Goliath stumbled and fell face-first to the ground. The armies of Israel erupted in victory. David ran forward, took the giant's own sword, and cut off his head. That day, a shepherd boy became a warrior. David's fame spread quickly. The people sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." The words stirred envy in Saul's heart. As time passed, Saul's jealousy grew into hatred. Twice, he hurled his spear at David, but both times, the young man escaped. Realizing his life was in danger, David fled into the wilderness. There, he gathered a band of loyal followers, outcasts and warriors who saw him as their leader. Though Saul pursued him relentlessly, David refused to harm the king. One night, Saul entered a cave to rest, unaware that David and his men were hiding inside. In the darkness, David crept forward with his dagger. His men urged him to strike, but David only cut off a piece of Saul's robe. The next morning, from a distance, he called out to the king, "My lord the king!" See this piece of your robe? I could have killed you, but I did not. Let the Lord judge between us." Saul wept, acknowledging David's righteousness. But his jealousy would not fade. Years passed, and Saul's reign crumbled. The Philistines waged war again, and in the chaos, Saul and his sons fell in battle. When news of Saul's death reached David, he mourned deeply. Though Saul had been his enemy, he had also been the Lord's anointed. The elders of Israel came to David in Hebron. "You shall be king over Israel," they declared. They anointed him, and at last, David ascended to the throne. The shepherd boy had become a king. But his story was far from over. For even a man after God's own heart would face trials, betrayals, and sins of his own. The road ahead would be filled with victories and sorrows, blessings and consequences. David had been king over Judah for 7 years when the tribes of Israel finally united under his rule. His first act as king was to establish a strong capital. He set his eyes on a fortress held by the Jebusites, a city called Jerusalem. The Jebusites mocked him from their walls. "Even the blind and the lame can keep you out," they taunted. But David was not deterred. His men found a secret water shaft leading into the city. Under the cover of night, they climbed through, opening the gates for David's army. Jerusalem fell, and from that day forward, it became the city of David, the heart of his kingdom. There, David built a palace. But his greatest desire was not for a throne of stone, it was to bring the Ark of the Covenant, the very presence of God, into the city. David led a grand procession to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. Musicians played, singers rejoiced, and the people danced in the streets. Clothed in a simple linen robe, David himself danced before the Lord with all his might, but not everyone was pleased. His wife Michal, Saul's daughter, watched from a window, disgusted by his display. "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today," she said mockingly when David returned home. Dancing half-naked before the servants like a fool. David met her gaze, unashamed. "I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this if it means honoring him." Though David was king, he remained a man who worshipped with his whole heart. One night, as David rested in his palace, he spoke with the prophet Nathan. "I live in a house of cedar," David said, "but the ark of God remains in a tent. I want to build a house for the Lord." Nathan agreed, but that night, God gave him a message. "Tell David this, I have taken you from the pasture to be ruler over my people. I will make your name great, and your descendants will rule forever. But you will not build my house, your son will." When David heard these words, he bowed before the Lord in awe. God had promised him not just a kingdom, but an eternal dynasty. And from his line, one day, the Messiah would come. David's reign brought unparalleled success to Israel. He led his army into battle against the Philistines, the Moabites, the Edomites, and the Arameans, securing the borders of the kingdom. Wherever he went, the Lord gave him victory. Under his rule, Israel flourished. Justice and righteousness filled the land, and David's name became feared among the nations. But power and success can be dangerous. And even a man after God's own heart was not immune to temptation. One evening, as David walked on the rooftop of his palace, his eyes fell upon a woman bathing. She was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers. Desire took root in his heart. Though he knew she was married, David sent for her, and she came to him. That night, a seed of sin was planted, one that would bring devastating consequences. Not long after, Bathsheba sent word, she was pregnant. Fear gripped David. If the truth were known, his reputation would be ruined. In desperation, he summoned Uriah from the battlefield, hoping he would sleep with his wife and cover the scandal. But Uriah, a man of honor, refused to enjoy the comforts of home while his fellow soldiers were at war. David's panic deepened. He wrote a letter to Joab, his military commander, instructing him to place Uriah in the fiercest battle and withdraw, ensuring his death. The plan worked. Uriah was killed. After a time of mourning, David took Bathsheba as his wife. But God saw everything. And he was not pleased. Nathan the prophet arrived at the palace with a message. There were 2 men in a city, Nathan began, one rich and one poor. The rich man had many sheep, but the poor man had only one, a lamb he loved like a daughter. One day, the rich man took the poor man's lamb and killed it to feed his guest. Tell me, O king, what should be done? David's anger burned. That man deserves to die. Nathan's eyes met his. You are that man. Silence fell. Nathan's voice did not waver. You took Uriah's wife and had him killed. Because of this, the sword will never depart from your house. David's face paled. He had been exposed. He had sinned against God. Falling to the ground, he wept bitterly. I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan nodded. The Lord has taken away your sin, you will not die. But the child born to you will not live. Days later, Bathsheba's child grew ill and died. David fasted and prayed, but when the child was gone, he arose, washed, and worshipped the Lord. His servants were astonished. Why do you eat now? They asked. David's voice was heavy with grief but firm in faith. I cannot bring him back, but I will go to him one day. God, in his mercy, later gave David and Bathsheba another son, Solomon. And though David's sins had brought consequences, God's promise to him remained. The years passed, but the wounds of David's sins ran deep. His family was fractured. His own son, Absalom, turned against him, stealing the hearts of Israel. Soon, David found himself fleeing Jerusalem, this time, not from Saul, but from his own flesh and blood. Absalom declared himself king, and David, barefoot and weeping, climbed the Mount of Olives in mourning. But even in exile, he trusted in the Lord. War erupted between David's forces and Absalom's army. Though David ordered his men to spare his son, Absalom was caught in the branches of a tree while fleeing. Joab, David's commander, disobeyed the king's command and struck him down. When news reached David, he fell to his knees. Oh, my son Absalom! If only I had died instead of you. The victory was his, but his heart was broken. David ruled for many years, but as he aged, he grew weary. He passed his throne to his son Solomon, instructing him to follow the ways of the Lord. Before his death, he reflected on all he had seen, the triumphs, the failures, the mercy of God. He had been a shepherd, a warrior, a fugitive, a king, a sinner, and a man redeemed. Though he had stumbled, he had never stopped seeking the heart of God. And from his line, one day, the true king, the Messiah, would come. David was now old. His once strong body had grown weak, and he could no longer rule as he once did. Though he had fought many battles and survived countless trials, the greatest challenge now was ensuring a peaceful transition of power. But even in his final days, trouble arose. His son Adonijah, seeing his father's frailty, declared himself king without David's blessing. He gathered chariots, men, and priests to support him, believing he would take the throne. However, Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, went to David and reminded him of the Lord's promise, that Solomon, not Adonijah, was meant to reign. David, summoning the last of his strength, called for the prophet Nathan and the priest Zadok. Take Solomon and anoint him king over Israel, he commanded. Blow the trumpet and proclaim, Long live King Solomon. And so, before Adonijah could fully claim power, Solomon was crowned. The people rejoiced, and Adonijah's rebellion crumbled. With his final mission complete, David gave his last words to Solomon. On his deathbed, David looked at his son, the young king who would rule in his place. His voice was weaker now, but his heart remained strong. Be strong, my son, and act like a man, he said. Walk in the ways of the Lord your God. Keep his commands, his laws, and his decrees, so that you may prosper in all you do. He reminded Solomon of the promises God had made, that if his descendants remained faithful, the throne of Israel would never lack a king from David's line. Then, after 40 years of ruling Israel, David lay down with his ancestors. He had lived as a shepherd, a warrior, a fugitive, a king, a sinner, and a man redeemed. David, the man after God's own heart, had completed his journey. After David's death, Solomon ruled with wisdom and peace, fulfilling his father's dream by building the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. Under Solomon, Israel reached its golden age, becoming a nation of wealth, wisdom, and splendor. But David's legacy was far greater than an earthly kingdom. Centuries later, from his lineage, a child was born in Bethlehem, the very city where David had once tended his sheep. He was not a warrior king like David, nor did he sit on a golden throne. Yet he was the fulfillment of God's eternal promise. That child was Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the King of Kings, who would rule forever. Thus, the story of David never truly ended. His life, filled with triumph and failure, joy and sorrow, pointed to something greater. Though he had been a flawed man, he had trusted in a perfect God. And through him, the greatest king of all was born.
Like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories alive.